Welcome to this session on leadership. We've been talking about both strategic leadership and tactical leadership. And we've talked about different roles a tactical leader has to play in a business. And last session, I introduced you to a very important concept called situational leadership. Now, this model, this tool, is so powerful that if you will grasp it, if you will understand it and apply it, I promise you, it will make a dramatic improvement in your day-to-day leadership effectiveness. This is a fantastic model. You may want to even review this particular session 2 or 3 times to make sure you understand it. But today we're going to take a deep dive into situational leadership. And as you know, we've talked about the concept of power. You've got to have power. And the best kind of power is personal power, as opposed to positional power. As the business owner, you have positional power, but you want to develop personal power and that kind of influence with the people you lead. And we talked about 3 key competencies: the importance of being able to diagnose a situation, and in diagnosing, we're talking about defining the task specifically, what needs to be accomplished, and determining the readiness of your followers. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. The second competency we talked about was adaptation. You've got to be able to adapt your style as the leader to meet the needs of your followers. And then the third key competency is communication. You've got to be able to articulate and communicate what you want to achieve and what you want your followers to do. Those 3 competencies are going to be key to your success as a leader. And they're foundational for this model we call situational leadership. Now, to jump into it, we want to start with understanding leadership behavior. As a leader, you exhibit certain behaviors, and we break those up into 2 categories. We call them task behaviors and relational behaviors. Both are very important. What are they? A task behavior tends to be instructional, directive, and one-way communication. If it's high task behavior, it's very instructional, it's very directive, and it's primarily one way. And then the second type of behavior is relational. Relational behavior is more empathic, it's more supportive. It involves more listening and participating with the person that you're leading. And so a high relational behavior would be one where you're asking a lot of questions, where you're listening a lot, where you're empathizing, where you're being very supportive in the way you communicate and relate to that person that you're leading. Some situations call for high task, some situations call for low task. Some situations call for high relational behavior, some situations call for low relational behavior. And to help you understand that, I've put it on a grid here, and you can look up this model online. Just look up situational leadership, do a Google search, and you'll find this chart that I'm going to draw out for you here. So let this represent 2 axes, and this horizontal axis right here is going to be task behavior, and this vertical axis right here is going to be relational behavior. Now this is low, this is high, this is low, this is high. And so as you think about your behaviors as a leader, I want you to analyze them. I want you to break them down and be very specific. I want you to think about 3 or 4 specific behaviors you typically engage in as a leader. So to help us along, I'm going to suggest a few. You might say, well, one of the things that I do is I give instructions. That's good. Instructions would be probably high task, but low relationship. And that's fine. In some situations, that's exactly what you need. Now, you may say, well, in another situation, I might give a lot of instruction, but a lot of supportive involvement as I'm doing it. Well, that kind of behavior would be high task and high relationship. And then you might say, well, in some situations, I don't feel like I have to give a lot of instruction or direction. I just need to be there to encourage and be supportive and participate with my followers. Well, that would be low task, but high relationship. And then some situations, you might say, I don't really need to be involved that much at all. I can just Give it to the folks and say, call me if you need me. And that's really low task and low relationship. So let me show you how this works on the chart. We're going to complete the chart. We're going to put everything in these 4 quadrants. So over here, I'm going to change my colors to help you. Over here, we have high task but low relationship behavior. That's basically very directional or instructional, one way, and that's it. We call this a telling style of leadership or directing style of leadership. If your behavior is high task but also high relationship, we call that a persuading style. Or Hersey and Blanchard and Johnson call it a selling style of leadership, where you're trying to sell the idea or sell the task or the behavior that you need. Over here, this style would be low task but high relationship, and we call this a participating style of leadership. And sometimes we refer to this as a collaborating style of leadership. And then down here, there is low task and low relationship. And this is basically delegating. Now, I do a lot of assessments with business owners and corporate leaders. And what I find is in these assessments that I give them, most of them actually score very low in delegating. They think they delegate, but they really don't understand what delegation is. They're typically doing one of these other styles, but they think they're delegating. And remember in the last session we talked about leadership style? It is defined by how you are perceived by your followers. And so if your followers do not perceive you as delegating, you may think you're delegating, but you're really not. And so think about that as we go through this. So these are your 4 general styles of leadership, and we could go on and illustrate each of these behaviors, give you some examples of more of them, but I hope you're kind of getting the idea of what we're talking about. Now, the real question is, when do you use which style? When do you use a telling style? And when do you use a persuading style? Because in certain situations, you need to use a telling style, and if you use one of these other styles, it will likely be counterproductive. In other words, it will not accomplish what you're wanting it to accomplish. So if your leadership is not accomplishing what you want it to accomplish, ask yourself, how am I being perceived as a leader? And then ask yourself, what kind of leadership do my followers need at this time in this situation? And use these 4 styles to help you think about how you lead others. Now, I'm going to stop here because I want you to let this soak in. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about which of these styles do you tend to use the most? Which of these styles do you gravitate to? Because we tend to have a preferred style, and if we're not thinking, we'll always use that same style. And in some situations, that style of leadership will actually hurt you, not help you. So think about this, let this soak in, and in the next session, we're going to talk about when do you use each style.